Have you ever wondered who is the most favorite and most hated in disc golf? Today we finally get data to back up answers to that exact question. Let's get into it. So all this data is coming from a fandom survey by Ultiworld, which is definitely going to include primarily disc golf fanatics. There are probably not too many casual viewers that would do a fandom survey for disc golf, so the people that are doing the survey are definitely more hardcore than most, but that does not mean that this data set does not have valuable information. Alright, so the range was from 0 to 10, 10 being the most favorite and 0 being kind of like the most hated, and 5 is effectively thinking about this person as neither positive nor negative, just right in the middle. So for instance, someone like a Simon or Kristin is going to be around that 10 mark, whereas a Nikko is going to be closer to like that 1 to 2 mark. All right, so first up, let's go over the top 3 MPO players. And I found this to be a little bit interesting because I think of MPO to be like Paul, Simon, and Calvin, but that was not the trend for the 2023 season. So number 1 with an 8.99 was Simon. Obviously, that's to be expected. Everyone loves Simon. Next up, Calvin, 8.32. And honestly, I'm actually a little bit surprised that Calvin was not closer to Simon because we see so much of Calvin week after week. Everyone loves him. There is just so few people that hate Calvin, whereas I think there are slowly becoming more and more people that kind of have a weird dislike for Simon. So third place was Nate Sexton with an 8.09. So really not that far off from Calvin, but what is more interesting in that number is that Sexton is not a top player. He doesn't really play much anymore, but he is still super beloved by all the fans. And it really doesn't matter how his play is. Everyone just loves to see him on commentary, loves to see him play. Everyone is a fan of Sexton. So to see him in third place is not super surprising, but it is just crazy to have a player that doesn't really have an impact on the tour. And he just narrowly edged out Matty O with an 8.01. And then what's kind of crazy is on the FPO, obviously we have Kristin, super high with an 8.64. She's the GOAT, best of all time. But for the people that don't really follow FPO, second was Ohn Scoggins, a freaking veteran, does not give up. Even at Worlds with a huge injury, she fought until she had to back out. She is just the true essence of a hardcore disc golfer that will never let age or injury hinder her performance, and everyone loves her for it. Now you might expect the third place spot to be Paige or Catrina. That was not the case. Neither of them were anywhere close to the top 3 spots. Third place was Sai Ananda, the Anaconda. Sai winning her first Silver Series event and kind of getting her first real recognition on tour, and we've seen her destroy at Worlds in 2021. There has definitely been a good showcase of her, but this was the first year that we got to really see her shine and become an amazing distance player, amazing circle 2 putter. She is a definite fun player to watch, and I think it really shows because everyone loves to see her play. And I think that unique factor to her play and overall style is what gives her the edge over other FPO players. But what is crazy here is that despite only having that one Silver Series win, she actually edged out Missy Gannon by almost 0.3 percentage points, which is definitely notable if you're trying to be a player that sells discs, is loved by fans, and will continually get good sponsors. Because I'm betting you heavily that Sai Ananda's contract is much smaller than Missy's. So sure, a survey isn't going to do a whole lot of justice to sponsors, but it does have a notable trend for Sai if she's trying to be like, hey, I have this amount of swing on the tour, and I think I should get this amount of money. Alright, so going from the top players, we got to talk about the other end, the bottom. Now, a lot of these is going to be no surprise, but still got to talk about it. Coming in at third with a 4.39, Drew Gibson. And I find this really surprising because Drew is still kind of loved by a lot of people. Sure, he can be incendiary, kind of be hot takey, but overall, his play style is fun. He has a good social presence. He does seem to be mostly aware about when he says something like over the top, he knows he's going to get pushback for it. And I just don't expect him to get such a low rating, but it is what it is. And somebody that was right next to him that I thought would get a lot worse rating was Emerson Keith with a 4.4. So just narrowly not getting that bottom 3 spot. Emerson does seem to be fitting that mold of somebody that isn't necessarily liked, but is still very good. Had a win on tour last season and continues to be a good player that shines in a couple of events every year. And then in the second spot with a 3.55, Joel Freeman. And this really is kind of sad. Like I think Joel is a player that gets so much unnecessary hate. I know he can be a little bit dramatic at times and kind of self-pitying on his social media, but I do think he's a phenomenal player that generally is just super chill. I've talked to him. He seems like a really cool guy. He was actually just on Bonanza, also a really chill presence there. So I think the general perspective that he is not that fun of a player will change over time because I do think his overall presence is just not being shown well at the moment. But last up, we got to talk about it. Nikko Locastro, 3.04. Honestly, I didn't expect his rating to even be that high. He does kind of put upon himself at times. He is a rager. He does go over the top at moments, but I've talked to him at Jonesboro, seemed really chill, and just his professional persona is just perceived as a very over the top and negative person. But I think the players on tour generally like him. According to his social media, he's actually getting into jiu-jitsu, so he's gonna hopefully get some angry nerves out there. But I think while he is incendiary at times, I think he's overall a good guy. I think everyone's overall dislike for him will wane over time, and I think while he is the bottom player in MPO, I think that will be a fleeting trend because everyone has a very long memory about what happened at European Open. But with that said, he also did not perform all that well in the 2023 season, with his best Elite Series finish being 16th at Waco, and had a bunch of events between 35th and 46th place, which is just not where you want to be, especially coming back from a year of controversy. I would have expected him to come back that much stronger, but it seems like the parity in the field has really pushed him back to be less of a mainstream player and more of a player that gets hot at a couple moments but doesn't really shine too much in comparison to everyone else. So going from MPO to FPO, we obviously know who the bottom person is, but the third place person is Sarah Hokom with a 4.93. So going from Drew with a 4.39 to Sarah with a 4.93, which is effectively neutral. I don't really think this is a terrible sign. I think everyone generally has strong thoughts about Sarah because her putt and her forehand, people like to make fun of it, but she is a beast at times and can really show up in her circle 2 putts. And I think sure, she has a little bit of a wonky style, but she generally does seem to be a fun player and somebody that I like to watch from time to time, even if I don't actively root for her. Next up would be Kat with a 4.67. This is probably the most surprising because she is the best world champ, and we obviously know that the end of the season ended very poorly for her. I think she was quoted on the live stream saying that, like, if she could just drop out right now, she would. I don't know if this was like an injury or if she just had a mental block, but whatever the reason was, she played terribly, and she was basically never on coverage unless it was like a first round where she had a couple of good putts. But also along with that, she has her fair share of controversy and is not afraid to stir things up. So I think that combined with poor play really puts her near the bottom. But with that said, I do think people have a fondness for DGA, and she has a lot of Signature Series discs that I bet sell pretty well. So even though she isn't beloved, I think she is still selling well enough for DGA to find it a good, worthwhile investment. And then the bottom player, edging out Nico by 0.02, Natalie Ryan. I won't talk about it too much because everyone in the comments will explode me for anything that I say, so I'll just keep it brief. Obviously, we know she has a very intense vendetta against the Pro Tour for excluding her from events, and that will primarily be the reason why people dislike her. But whatever the reason is, she is definitely the most disliked player in all of disc golf, and I find this to be basically no surprise. And with everything becoming so polarizing, I think this number is almost destined to go even lower than it is. All right, so now into the nitty-gritty stats that kind of highlight what people thought about players that aren't at the top, aren't at the bottom, kind of are in that middle range. And I find this to be very interesting because a lot of players that I love are generally not as much as other people. So my first observation was that James Proctor and Niklas Anttila are honestly not that highly ranked. They almost have 0 ratings below 5, but there are very few 9s and 10s, which generally make me think that people don't really think about these players too much. They have a general fondness for them, but nobody's really loving James or Niklas, even though they're probably my top picks. I love to watch them play. I've talked to James Proctor. It was an awesome interview, probably one of my highlights in my entire disc golf career. And Niklas is somebody I've actually seen at my local course. It was so cool, and I think just his overall performance week after week has shown that he is just the cream of the crop, and it is just a matter of time until he destroys the tour. And then on the flip side, Joel is in a very opposite position where he has very few ratings above 5. So it goes to show that even if you are a dominant player, it does not mean people are really liking you all that much. And like I said before, I think this will change over time. And then another player that I found to be very interestingly average was Double G. So very few people thought negatively of him, but he also had very few 9s and 10s, with his main rating being 5. So just a little bit over average, being a total bomber off the tee pad, getting some pretty good circle 2 putts over the course of the season. Even with all that, people just don't really think about him as fondly as others. And then another interesting observation is that Germ is just on the down low. I don't really know what it is. People don't really talk about him nearly as much, and his rating is nearly identical to Ezra Aderhold. And I find this very interesting because when I think about Ezra, I think about like, yeah, he's beloved, but in terms of him compared to Germ, I would suspect that Germ is way higher. But the stats prove that it is effectively equal, and I also think this might be due to the love for Jomaz being down a little bit, so people don't really think about Germ nearly as much, but people think about Ezra a lot with how much social media he has, and people are actively watching his content, whereas they might not be watching Jomaz. And then some players that actually have very different stats, even though we kind of think of them as very similar. Corey Ellis has very high ratings relative to what we think about him as a player, because he is still fighting his way to be a top player and seems to be very well respected. But somebody that has been on the tour for a while, and you would guess guess has a little bit better ratings than him would be Adam Hammes, and that is very much not the case. Adam has a lot of ratings below 5, so people generally think worse about him than they do Corey, and I think this might be due to the fact that he just gets a little bit ragey and can definitely kind of get tilted. But I do find that very interesting, because if I'm watching a card with Corey and Adam, I'm pretty stoked about that, because they both have amazing distance, amazing putting, and they are very unique with the way that they throw. And then talking about the best players, Eagle versus Ricky. And I didn't think this would be nearly as much of a landslide as it is, but people generally are rating Eagle way higher than Ricky, with Eagle only having a couple of ratings below 5, whereas Ricky has like 3 times the number of negative ratings. So people seem to really like Eagle and generally have a neutral response about Ricky, which is very surprising with him being such a good player and dominating the field in 2022 and still doing very well in 2023. But the fact that he was out for a little bit could have affected that, and he is still kind of polarizing from time to time. And then a very interesting observation, outside of the top 3 players that I talked about, the next player with the fewest negative responses was Alexis Mandujano. And I don't really know what to attribute this other than that people generally just like her, and she does seem to be a very positive person. And then later in the article, they pointed out that there are way more people that root against MPO players than root against FPO players. And I don't know if this is like a issue of just people don't watch FPO, so they don't really have negative emotions towards FPO, or it's like a gender thing. I don't really know, but I did find it very interesting. All right, so now looking on the change of rankings from last year to this year, it was very interesting. Isaac Robinson rose 30 points. Third highest change in rankings would be Brodie with 17 points. And I think this definitely goes to show that people may dislike you one year, but if you just continually push and grind and kind of showcase who you are as a player, people will generally like you a lot more. And what is also notable here is that Alden Harris and Ezra Robinson also rose a decent margin. So having that social media, being out in the open about your grind really does do a lot of positive things towards your overall growth as a player. And then next up with a 20-point increase, Niklas. And I just love to see this because Niklas really is the GOAT. I think he is one of the best players of all time, and I love to see this. But that was still not even anywhere close to the top player. 30-point increase, Isaac Robinson. People are just loving him. There seems to be a lot more love for him than Gannon Buhr according to the survey, which I would not have guessed. I thought Gannon would be far and away higher than Isaac, but I think with that Worlds win and Champions Cup, people think about Isaac a lot more on a day-to-day basis as of late. And then on FPO with a 12-point increase, Ella Hansen. And I think her play has definitely improved. Obviously, she almost won Waco, can't forget that. But I think her overall social media presence allowed her to grow and become a lot more favorable as a player. And then on the flip side, the people that went way back in rankings, third place being Thomas with negative 19 points. And I really feel for Thomas. I think he is such a good player. I just don't know if it's like an injury thing, a form thing, but he just doesn't really seem to be on top of his game. So that's probably the reason for that decrease. Gregg Barsby, negative 21, also similar case, just doesn't really seem to be out in the open for a dominant performance. And then the worst change with a negative 23-point ranking change would be Double G. And again, I think he's just not doing well enough for the 2023 season to really get his name out there. It's mostly just ads, and that's not going to do enough justice to really put your name in a positive mindset. All right, so with all that said, let's go over the favorite player. So obviously we kind of know what this is going to look like based upon the ratings, but let's still talk about it. Ricky gets a 7th place with 2.5% of people thinking that he is their favorite player. I think this is a very notable trend that people think about Ricky a lot less than they used to. Third place being Paul McBeth with a 10.9%. The fact that he is so low on this list also is very intriguing because I generally think of him being people's favorite far and away, but that is just not the case. He has not done that much. He is much more outside of the public eye, and he's doing his foundation stuff, not performing nearly as well at tour events. So people are just thinking about him a lot less. And then the top two. Second place, we have Calvin with a 19.9%. And I think this is very much apt to be what I perceive him to be in the market. If he's selling a disc, it's probably going to sell very well. Calvin Destroyers do great, and I think people generally find him to be a phenomenal presence, phenomenal player, all around great guy. But that does not mean that he is the top spot. Obviously, it is number one, Simon Lizotte with a 31%. Obviously, kind of like an insane number, because in my head, this is effectively like a 31% market share about the disc golf industry. So people are thinking about you way more than everyone else. Anyone that sponsors you is going to do very well. MVP was definitely doing the right thing by giving him a lot of money, because he will sell way more than Calvin, potentially more than Paul, but probably not. It's probably close to. So close to Paul. It is a great sign for him, great sign for MVP. Simon is the GOAT once more. Everyone loves him, including me, and I think he is definitely worthy of the favorite player of the year. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Who do you think is your favorite? Who do you think is your least favorite for MPO and FPO? I would love to know. And if you have any disagreements about this list, be sure to comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.